What is up, guys? Rick Kakis here, and it is Saturday, so that means it's time for some more amazing fan-made exotics for Destiny. Now, this is the only series where you can submit your exotic Destiny weapon, armor, ghost shell, artifact, or pretty much any exotic Destiny idea and have a realistic concept art made for it. Now, that's because I've partnered with the artist Benjamin Radaman, who makes these amazingly realistic exotic concepts. His deviant art will be linked first link in the description down below. Now, on the docket for today's video, firstly we're going to be going over 5 featured exotics that all came from the comment section of last week's video. After that, we're going to talk about the proper way to submit your exotic idea. Tons of people are still doing it wrong, so please listen to that part, as well as we're going to go over some very useful tips that will highly help you get picked. And then last up, we're going to shout out all of the different creations that were made since last week. However, before we start any of that, it should be said that firstly, if you enjoy these videos and want to see more, please remember to support this series by liking and especially sharing this video. It really helps myself and Benjamin out a ton. Furthermore, if you guys want to leave your exotic idea, we only take the ideas from the newest video. So if you're watching this video and there's a newer video than this one, an annotation will appear right now leading you to that newest video. So with that said and done, let's get started on the featured exotic concepts. First off here with the Fate Weaver, exotic scout rifle concept by Nash Ketchberry. Now, this scout rifle has a few unique abilities. The first is an exotic passive perk, Fated 3. Getting 3 consecutive precision hits on any target will trigger a small solar explosion, dealing damage equal to its precision damage in a short radius around the target. Moving on, it has as a main perk Firefly. I just thought I'd mention that because it fits into the theme of the weapon. And its next exotic perk is Fate Weaver. With each activation of the Fated 3 perk, the magazine will replenish by half, and enemies killed by Fated 3 will trigger an agility bonus for 5 seconds. So, there's a couple of things we need to address about this weapon, with the first one being that it's potentially incredibly overpowered. The reason being is that if this weapon fits into any of the 4-shot kill archetypes, getting 3 headshots and instantly doing an explosion that deals as much damage as another one, that's ridiculous. Like, imagine the Mida multi-tool potentially killing in 3 headshots, and I'm sure you guys could see that's overpowered. However, luckily, we just put the scout rifle into the highest damaging archetype, where those scout rifles already kill in 3 headshots on the Crucible, and then you have a totally fine, totally balanced PvE focused scout rifle, which I believe this would fit into very well. Now, that ability is actually very interesting. Getting 3 headshots, and you basically get an extra form of damage. This thematically kind of sounds like somewhat like the Outbreak Prime, where if you get, 4 bursts, it's going to trigger the Siva Swarm nanites to come out and do extra damage. Somewhat similar to the Medulla as well, where just, it does more damage every once in a while. This would be somewhat similar, potentially doing more damage, maybe not as much damage as the Outbreak Prime, but definitely would be very good against bosses. That's where we're going to be able to constantly trigger this ability. So against bosses, it definitely does seem like, quite the powerful exotic primary. But again, it's up against already insanely powerful exotic primaries for doing the same thing, so I don't potentially see it being overpowered in that regard. I do like the idea of the explosion doing solar damage. Like, the weapon itself doesn't do solar damage, but the solar explosion it causes does, which is kind of a cool thing. Like, it would still be a very good, probably the best primary to use during solar burn, but it wouldn't be an outright solar weapon, like completely taking over all of the solar activities. Bungie eliminated the elemental weapons to avoid that, and this is kind of a nice halfway between. Now moving on, we have Mjolnir, exotic rocket launcher concept by Arc 48. with Mjolnir, or however it's pronounced, of course being Thor's hammer. This rocket launcher is going to fit in pretty thematically to that. It's going to have two exotic perks. The first one being that aiming down sights with this weapon is going to dramatically increase the velocity of the warhead. The other exotic perk is that on contact, so when the rocket hits something, it's going to release bolts of lightning to enemies in a nearby radius, severely damaging them. So, that's a pretty interesting idea, with the main feature of this rocket launcher being that when it hits a target, it's going to explode in what sounds like a much bigger radius than what normal rocket launchers do, but it's going to shoot out lightning, and that's going to damage enemies in this larger radius. Now you've got to remember, this rocket launcher doesn't have tracking, it doesn't have grenades and horseshoes, and so although it will be dealing that lightning damage over a very large radius, a larger radius than pretty much any other rocket launcher, and there are going to be people who, are raging because of how large the radius is. How did I get hit from there? That sort of thing. Again, compared to what we already have for exotic rocket launchers in a PvP scenario, Truth, Galahorn for goodness sakes, this doesn't sound that incredibly overpowered to me. Again, it doesn't seek, doesn't have grenades and horseshoes. You actually have to hit it on the ground, and yes, the radius is going to be huge, but that is, that's why it's exotic. It has to be good in some respect. Now, in PvE, this really feels like a proper ad-killing machine. Being able to shoot this rocket launcher within a bunch of ads, and have all of those ads on your screen die. That's fantastic. You still have rocket launchers like the Truth and the Galahorn. You shoot a bunch of ads, and apparently it only hits the two in front, and the other four behind it are still alive. With this, that would hopefully solve that problem. Ain't no shenanigans about that crap. It's gonna kill all of the enemies dropping out of a skiff or what have you, and that definitely seems like a pretty cool idea. So, would be potentially quite useful in PvP, the larger radius. Zooming down sights massively increases the velocity. No tracking takes away from that, definitely. But in PvE, I see this definitely being used as a very, very good ad clearing machine. Additionally, we do not have any ARC exotic rocket launchers in Destiny right now. This could be our first one. Moving on, we have the Bloodhound, exotic auto rifle concept by the Omega Flower. Now this weapon has two unique abilities, the first one being the passive perk Death of Many. Kills leave a small puddle of blood that when stepped in tracks footprints. So if you kill an enemy with this weapon, he's going to drop that puddle of blood, and if another enemy walks through that same location, you're going to get some sense for what that other enemy is doing. Where he's heading, what direction at least he was heading at the time. And that's going to give you some information that, you wouldn't otherwise have had. Now the other perk that really goes into this is the exotic perk Bloodshed. If you kill one of the enemies that are tracked, so one of the enemies that have stepped in the pool of blood, they will explode and shoot blood everywhere, which coats all enemies around them and poisons them for 3 seconds. Now, there's definitely going to need to be some revisions to this perk because Destiny is rated T for teens, so you can't well have people exploding in bloody pulp everywhere. However, the idea of leaving, a small puddle of blood or what have you, tracking enemies, and then if you do kill that tracked enemy, he's going to explode or at least release a cloud or something like that that's going to damage all enemies nearby. That's actually not a bad idea. That's a very interesting assortment of perks that play off each other. You have the one perk that makes it a little easier for you to find enemies to kill, and then when you do kill those enemies, they create an additional bonus. So decently interesting idea, would probably be more usable in PvP. You definitely don't need to track where a thrall went because they're coming right at you. So that's where I see this getting the most play. Depending on how much damage the poison would do or the lingering effect would do, that's really gonna, make this weapon see more or less play in those PvP arenas. Alright, now moving on, we have the Celestial Immortality exotic hunter chest concept by Ethan Thomas. Now this is a very interesting idea because the exotic perk is Celestial Purity. This armor can only be equipped if you're also using the Celestial Nighthawk Exotic Hunter helmet. Now, that's a pretty interesting ability. We haven't seen anything like that so far. It's the idea of exotic set pieces, exotic armor that works with other exotic armor pieces. We've already had some exceptions to the one exotic rule, the exotic class armors, that give you extra faction rep. That's an example of that. Potentially, Bungie could keep stretching these very stingent one exotic rules. Now, this exotic is going to have the exotic perk, Celestial Goddess. Allows the player to gain an extra throwing knife charge. So, there you have it. It gives you a pretty minor exotic ability, one extra throwing knife charge that's decently useful, but it's only usable with the Celestial Nighthawk. So that is really why we're showcasing this exotic today. It brings up the idea, it brings up the discussion of having these set exotics that work only when you're using other exotics within the game, and that's a pretty interesting idea. This exotic by itself, if you just had the plain Jane exotic where you didn't need to also be using the Celestial Nighthawk, that wouldn't actually be that insane of an ability. An extra throwing knife charge, kind of whoop-de-doo. But the fact that you have to be using the other exotic actually kind of reins this in, makes it so that you are getting a decent bonus considering you're already using another armor piece that's exotic, and therefore it's actually balanced pretty well for having that ability. What do you guys think? Are set exotics something you'd like to see in Destiny's future and even in Destiny 2? Now moving on, the last weapon to showcase today is a very interesting one. The Rhino Mark V Heavy Hand Cannon concept by Peyton Barrett. Now yes, this is a hand cannon that goes in your heavy slot, and therefore it's definitely going to have a few unique abilities. The first one is Gauss loaded. This weapon fires a beam of Gauss energy, somewhat kind of like a fusion rifle, but with a slower travel time of the bullet. So it fires very powerful, like energy-focused bullets that do have a little bit of a travel time. They don't go instantaneously to the enemy like normal hand cannons, so it's going to be a little bit harder to use. You've got to also remember, though, that these hand cannon shots are doing massive damage. Maybe not able to kill in a single shot in PvP, but almost. Moving on, we have the main perk, Heavy Loaded. This weapon can over-penetrate targets, basically armor-piercing rounds as an intrinsic perk. Next, we're going to have the exotic perk, Rhino's Power. Firing this weapon will leave a trail of arc energy behind that damages anything that goes through it. So you shoot this weapon, it's going to shoot that massive energy projectile, which is going to have a little bit of a travel speed that arcs through the air, and then it leaves a little bit of a trail for a few seconds, and if you just miss an enemy and that enemy passes through that trail, they're still going to take a little bit of damage. But the main thing about this weapon is that you're making a hand cannon incredibly powerful, and you're balancing that factor by simply putting it in the heavy slot. I think Bungie should definitely experiment with more ideas like this. We've seen some things trickle down like this. The Sleeper Simulant is basically a heavy fusion rifle. Why not have a heavy hand cannon? I think it would be a pretty damn cool idea, and I think that this in a PvE scenario would actually be pretty damn awesome if you're using something like the Ruin Wings, or you're using the new Wrath of the Machine Raid gauntlets that make heavy drop more often. You could potentially get some pretty damn awesome usage out of this gun. So, heavy hand cannons. Bungie, make it a thing. Now, that's going to be it for the featured exotics in today's video. Moving on to the proper way to submit your idea. All you need to do, if you want to submit your idea, is to reply to the official comment I'm going to leave in the comment section down below. So I'm going to make a comment saying reply with your idea to this comment here. Do so, and your idea will be looked at. Now, if you reply anywhere else in the normal comment section, on Twitter, email me directly, none of those ideas are counted. So please just reply to the official thread. That first thread is going to fill up with the 500 reply limit pretty quickly, and so just reply in thread number 2. Benjamin will make sure to look in thread number 2, so don't feel like you're not going to be counted if you're in that second thread. Now moving on, some tips for getting selected. Following these things will drastically increase your chance to get picked. Firstly, try to self-regulate your ideas. Tons of ideas aren't selected because they're blatantly overpowered in PvP. Try to account for this. You can't get a kill and instantly get an overshield. That's ridiculous. Moving on, also try to make sure that your idea isn't overly complicated. If you've got paragraphs and paragraphs trying to explain what your perks do, it's likely too much. Think of it this way: if I would have to spend 10 minutes of the video just explaining your idea, we can't select you. After that, another tip is that you need to make sure your idea is realistic for Destiny. Turning into a dragon after a kill or something just isn't going to ever be implemented into the game. But the last tip is that really don't be afraid to break the traditional gun types and gun archetypes. We just looked at a heavy hand cannon. Don't be afraid to do stuff like that. SMGs, all of that stuff is wide open, and we welcome all of those ideas. And moving on, the last thing we're going to do in today's video is shout out all of the creations that were made since last week. First up, we have the Devil of Mars, exotic auto rifle concept by Grievous vs. Dark Ahsoka. After that, we have the Utterance, exotic hand cannon concept by Vegeta the Thug. After that, we have the Dragon's Maw, exotic hand cannon concept by Spun 3. Next, we have the Hood of Thieves, exotic hunter cloak concept by Dusty P9. And that is gonna wrap up the exotic concepts for this week. Guys, again, if you want to support this series, if you like these videos, please remember to simply rate and especially share them. If you want to see more Destiny content from me and want to keep up to date with this series, the best way is just to slap that subscribe button. Now, if you want to get in touch with me, tell me thread number 2 is full. What you need to do is follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's going to be linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.